Hello students, today we will discuss force of friction. First question is, what is frictional force? The force of friction which opposes the relative motion between two surfaces. Force of friction which opposes the relative motion of two surfaces in contact. Suppose it is any object having mass m and it is placed on the table. If force is applied in forward direction like this, then the direction of force will be in opposite to the direction of applied force. So we can say, first, the force of friction acts tangential to the surface in contact and it is in the direction opposite to that of motion of object. Now, causes of friction. How force of friction arises. First, first reason of force of friction is due to roughness of surface. Actually, when we see the surface of an object, it may appear to be smooth, but as we see it through a microscope, the magnified image will show a number of tiny hills and grooves. When the object tends to slide over the surface of another body, interlocking of hills and grooves resist the relative motion and create the force of friction. So, no surface is smooth. When we see any surfaces at microscopic level, it looks like this figure, and at the points of contact, the interlocking of grooves and hills occur, due to which force of friction arises. Now, second reason is due to force of adhesion between the two surfaces. The two surfaces, when placed together, meet only at certain points. The atoms or molecules present at such points of contact attract each other due to electrostatic attraction. These attractions are called force of adhesion. When one body is made to move the other body, the force of adhesion opposes motion. This force which opposes the motion also gives rise to frictional force. So we can say the force of adhesion between the two surfaces gives rise to force of friction. Now, next topic is factors on which friction force depends. First is force of friction is directly proportional to the weight of body which moves. Suppose any object having mass m is placed on any surface. Here the weight of object is given by mass into acceleration due to gravity. Weight of object is the force exerted by Earth towards its center due to weight of any object. So it is given by this formula m into g, where m is the mass of body and g is acceleration due to gravity, and g equals to 9.8 meter per second square on the surface of Earth. So we can say frictional force is directly proportional to the weight of object. Suppose force of friction is small f, which is directly proportional to the W, which is weight of object. Now, second point is On the force of friction depends on the nature of surface in contact. For example, the force of friction between a pair of polished surfaces is very small as compared to the force of friction between two rough surfaces. So we can say force of friction is directly proportional to the nature of surface. Here nature of surface means how much it is rough. The third point is the force of friction does not depend upon the area of surfaces in contact till weight remains the same. Suppose any body of mass m is placed on any table like this, and the same body is placed now vertically on the same table. So in the both condition, in which condition force of friction will be greater? So when we calculate the force of friction, we find the force of friction in both the cases will be same. So we can say force of friction does not depend on the contact area of surfaces, because in the both cases here the contact area is larger than the second condition, but in both of the condition the force of friction will be same. So we can say force of friction does not depend on area of surfaces in contact for same object. Same object means here same weight. Now the next is friction is self-adjusting force. Self-adjusting force. Suppose here any wooden block lying on horizontal surface having mass small m. When we apply any force, suppose F equals to 2 Newton on this block, what we observe, the block remains at rest. It means that the applied force on the block has been exactly balanced by the force of friction. So here force of friction will also be equal to the 2 Newton in the opposite direction of the applying force. Now suppose we increases the applied force by the small amount. Suppose now the applying force is 3 Newton. Again we observe the block remains at rest. Obviously the force of friction has also increased and has become equal and opposite to the applied force. So we can say here force of friction will be equal to the applied force, which is 3 Newton, in the opposite direction of it. Now suppose when we increases the value of applying force, Suppose it is 4 Newton. Now, what we observe, the stage comes when the block just starts sliding. So we can say the maximum value of force of friction which comes into play before a body just begins to slide over the surface of another body is called limiting friction. So the force of friction always adjusts itself equal to the applied force up to the value of limiting friction. That is, as much force of friction comes into play as it just necessary to prevent the body from moving. Now, next is types of friction. First is static friction. What is static friction? When the force of friction which balances the applied force so that the body on which force is applied does not move at all, then the force of friction is called static friction. Here we can explain this type of force of friction by this figure. Suppose any block of mass m is placed on any horizontal surface and here any force is applied on this block like this, suppose capital F, but this body is not moving, it remains at rest. So in this condition the force of friction between the surface of block and this horizontal surface is known as static friction. Now second is dynamic friction, or we can say kinetic friction or sliding friction. The force of friction comes into play when one body moves on the surface of another body, then the force of friction between the surface of both of the bodies will be dynamic friction. Suppose again the block of mass m is placed on any horizontal surface and here again the force is applied on this block, suppose it is capital F, and by applying this force what we observe, it moves, it starts moving on this horizontal surface. So in this case the force of friction between these two surfaces is known as dynamic friction or kinetic friction or sliding friction. Now third is rolling friction. The friction which comes into play when one body rolls on the surface of another body, then the force of friction between both of the surfaces of bodies is known as rolling friction. Suppose here it is any block of mass m and having wheels. and it is again placed on any horizontal surface. Then what we observe that this block moves on this horizontal surface very easily compared to the first two frictions, dynamic friction or static friction. So we can say here the rolling friction is less than kinetic friction or static friction. And one conclusion is also here that kinetic friction is always less than static friction. Now, some examples of rolling friction. First example, when a car or bus or bicycle etc. moves on road, a part of its wheel and the surface of road gets continuously deformed. Thus, force has to be applied to overcome this deformation and is equivalent to the rolling friction. It is for the same reason that more force is required when the tires do not have sufficient air pressure. Conversely, if the tires are heavily inflated, the deformation produced is very small and hence the rolling friction decreases. However, the ride becomes very bumpy. Furthermore, it becomes difficult to apply brakes as the vehicle does not stay on its path during the application of brakes. Second, we also know rolling skates have teeny wheels. These wheels have very small rolling friction and help in fast motion of skater. Third, we can say second is in roller skates. First is between wheels of vehicles and road. Third is we can say these days luggage such as suitcases are provided with tiny wheels. These wheels offer very small amount of rolling friction and are easy to move. So we can say it luggage with wheels. Now causes of rolling friction. The roller or the wheel deforms the surface on which it is rolling temporarily. Like suppose it is any ball which is moves on road. So here deformation is formed like this, and due to this deformation here one inclined plane is formed on this surface. So, in this process, the roller or the wheel itself gets deformed temporarily at the point of contact of the surface of the body. Because of the above deformation, a kind of inclined plane is formed in the direction of motion of roller or wheels. Thus, a force is required to overcome this temporary but continuously forward moving inclined plane. This force applied against the continuously forward moving inclined plane is the equivalent to the rolling friction. From the above discussion, it is clear that smaller the depression formed at the point of contact of wheel or roller with the given surface, the lesser is the force of rolling friction and vice versa. Furthermore, rolling friction is far less than the sliding friction. This is achieved by using wheels, ball bearings, roller bearings, etc. Now, next is advantage and disadvantage of friction. First is, without friction, we would slip and fall every time we attempt to walk or run. There is very little friction on a wet polished floor. That is why it is easy to slip on such a floor. So we can say first point is we can't move or walk or run on the surface in the absence of friction. Now, second is friction causes nails and screws to hold on the walls. So, we can say it is necessary to hold the nails on wall. Now, third is it would not be possible to light a matchstick without friction between its head and the side of matchbox. So we can say third point is we can't light a matchstick without friction. Now, fourth point is cars and buses are able to run on roads because of friction between the tires and the road. So, it is necessary for movement of vehicles on road. Now, fifth point is it is because of friction between the brake shoes and wheels that bicycles and automobiles stop when brakes are applied. Now, some disadvantage of force of friction. First is the heat produced in the moving part of machinery due to friction result in wear and tear of parts. So we can say first point is wear and tear of the parts of machine. Second, Forest fires are caused due to friction between branches of trees rubbing against each other. So, we can say second point is forest fire causes due to force of friction. Third point is tires of vehicles and soles of footwear wear out of because of friction. So, we can say third point is sole of shoes wear out. Now, fourth and last point, energy is wasted in overcoming the force of friction. So these are the some advantages and disadvantages of force of friction. Now, ways to reduce the friction. Here, we will discuss some points to reduce the force of friction. First is by polishing the surface. Rough surfaces can be made smooth by polishing. Polishing removes hills and valleys from the surfaces. Therefore, polishing of surfaces reduces the force of friction. Second point is by applying oil and grease on the surfaces. Oil and grease forms a thin layer between the two surfaces, thus a lubricant separates the two surfaces. This reduces the change of interlocking of two surfaces and thus reduces the force of friction. Soap solution also acts as lubricant. That is why we tend to slip on the floor if it is covered with soap solution. And this point can also be explained with the help of figure. Suppose two rough surfaces are here and when we fill this empty space between these two surfaces with the oil, then here force of friction may be decreased. Force of friction decreases. Now, second point is by using ball bearings and roller bearings and roll bearings. When a body rolls over a surface, the force of friction is much less. That is why friction can be reduced by using ball bearings or roller bearings in machine. Next point we can say by sprinkling a soft fine powder on the surfaces. So, a small quantity of talcum powder on a wooden surface or flour, etc. reduces friction. That is why a small quantity of talcum powder is applied on carom board. Graphite powder is also used in machines to reduce friction. Now, the next point is by streamlining the body of an object. Streamlining the body of an object. So, properly shaped bodies called streamlined experiences less friction from air or water. Bodies of cars, aeroplanes, rockets, ships, etc. are streamlined. Birds and fishes also have streamlined bodies and are example of nature. Now, ways to increase friction. First is by making surface rough. As we know, force of friction is directly proportional to the surface roughness of any surface. So we can say friction can be increased by increasing the roughness of the surface in contact. For example, the surface of the head of a matchstick and the sides of matchbox are made rough to increase the friction to produce more heat, because of which the matchstick light up easily. The second is by making grooves. As we know, when we can increase the friction in case of tires of bicycles, cars, buses, etc. by making grooves in them. Due to greater friction, the tires get a better grip on the road, which prevents skidding of the vehicles. Now, next is friction due to air. Friction due to air is so small that we hardly feel it. However, following activity will show the friction of air. Take a full sheet of paper and allow it to fall down from the level of your head. Record the time in which the sheet of paper reaches the ground level. Now, crumple the sheet in the form of a ball and allow it to fall down. After crumpling the sheet, now allow it to fall down from the level of your head. You will notice the crumpled ball quickly reaches the ground level. Now the question is why? It is because when the sheet is flat, it has a large surface area which experiences a large force of friction due to air and hence slows down. However, when the sheet is crumpled in the form of ball, it has very small surface. Like here given in figure, it has very small surface area. The small surface area experiences less force of friction due to air and hence reaches the ground level quickly. Some examples are also here. First, nature has shaped the body of birds in such a way that air offers least resistance and hence they can fly with good speed. Second example we can also share here, the body of aeroplane is streamlined so that the air offers least possible friction. And third example is the body of automobiles like car, bus, motorcycle, etc. is streamlined so that air offers least possible friction. And fourth and last example, the meteors, shooting stars, enter the atmosphere of the earth at a very high speed. At such speed, the friction due to air is extremely high. Due to this high friction, the temperature of meteors rises to such a high degree that they can catch fire.